Hey DCC, and welcome to another edition of Morning Coffee. There's a few things in my years that I have grown to notice and lost ignorance of. Right? There's an idea that before I kind of went through life and I was ignorant of those things, or I didn't really give much of a look to them, and then all of a sudden I had opportunity to really see those things, and I was disgusted. So one of those things was in developing friendship with a couple of my dear brothers in Christ, Will Hall and Quentin Mumphrey from Chicago, and they are just two of the greatest Christian brothers that anyone could have, and I love them, and I love what they're doing in their community. They have been sacrificing themselves for people in their community for so much. But one of the things that Will and Quentin helped me see in a greater light was racism. And a lot of times, having grown up in a lot of different states, I've been in both the North and the South, and I was always willing to relegate that extreme racism was always, something that happened in the South, and yet Will and Quentin certainly showed me that there was racism that was alive and well, and I'm not talking about subtle racism that you can't see. I'm talking about all and all out, terrible, nasty racism that is prevalent. And so many of you are familiar with Chicago, and it's kind of the murder capital of the United States right now, and it doesn't matter what mayor we seem to throw at it. They just can't seem to solve the disunity. And there's a lot of corruption that goes on in the Chicago Police Department and whatnot. But as I started to read the writings of a few investigative journalists who are absolutely credible, they have no axe to grind, they're not on some political agenda, but who wrote about something like Homan Square and what was going on and what the police were doing. And it was just terrible. And you may or may not have interest to look up Homan Square and read what was going on and read those pieces, but the police department was just doing some terrible things to minorities within communities in Chicago, and it was just horrifying. And it made me upset, angry, frustrated. It showed that absolute power does corrupt. It just, it made me frustrated, and yet out of this, I also saw people like Will and Quentin join forces with pastors who weren't minorities, who in the city, and they would band together, and they would, you'd see them meeting and getting together and trying to build towards unity. And so in my life, I couldn't just sit back and kind of go, wow, I don't really see that anymore. I see it, and I need to pour out love on individuals in Chicago, and I need to pray for them daily, and because I know that I can only do so much to help them, but I know God can come in and do amazing work, and Will and Quentin are evidence of that, and so that was a big deal. And then as I grew into corporate world and I began to take leadership and executive positions, there were a few places I worked where there was intense misogyny. And I mean, like, there was just no acceptance of women in leadership. They were kind of treated as second class citizens. Their ideas weren't given much merit. They were forced to act certain ways in order to get any respect. And so again, just like the racism, it began to disgust me. I was like, man, how is this prevalent in our day and age? And good grief, some of the most talented people that I have worked with, who have given me so many ideas, who have been smarter than me, that have chased ideas better than, just in every way that they could be my equal or better, um, they were. and they were women. And so why are we treating women that way? And it was very frustrating. And again, because I saw it, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't just walk away from it. So that's put me on a track, right? Just as it did with racism, where I had to do everything that was in my power and then also go to God and allow him to kind of do the big work that he does in order to fight against this in any way, shape, or form that I could promote somebody that was due promotion because of their hard work and their. I had to make sure that I was not discriminating, that I wasn't looking or I wasn't doing something, even if that got me bad marks with my supervisors because they were, in essence, misogynistic in some way. And so when we see discrimination, right, and it can come in age discrimination, we look down upon a generation because somehow we don't give them the same deference that we were given, right? Hey, when I was 21, I made some really crappy decisions, but I also had potential. And there were men and women who invested in me and taught me and were patient with me, even in my stupidity, who saw that there was something there that they could build on. And anything that I have become ultimately is from God working through those men and women to help me. So even with age discrimination, I just, we can't sit silent, right? So one of the things that I love about the Bible is that a lot of times, whether it's, certain groups that fall outside the church or even some groups that do fall inside the church, we've had attacks from prominent leaders who kind of change their position and decide to kind of look down upon the church or look down upon the Bible, or they don't go to the Bible for certain things because they say it's ancient and it doesn't relate, and it was a document that was written thousands of years ago, and it doesn't get us. It doesn't understand that we should never go to something so ancient to govern our lives today. And I just always laugh at that because in this subject, I've covered racism, misogyny in the workplace, discrimination based on age, and I could cover a number of others, right? But let's talk about Paul and Paul's position, um, on how we approach unity, right? And he's not talking about unity on Sunday when you're attending, right? That's not how he understands the church. He understands the church as 24/7, and it's all believers and followers of Christ across all diversity, right? And so listen to what Paul says. He says in Colossians 3, here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and in all. In a group where surface differences as well as hugely deeper differences could easily divide people, right? If you are Scythian or you're from a foreign group and there's a pocket of you, then you could just kind of, in the church at Colossae, you could just kind of, hang out with them, right? Imagine the church potluck, and I'm just going to hang out with my bros here because we're from the same country, we're immigrants. Or there's these differences between the Gentiles and the Jews. Paul also uses, circumcised and uncircumcised. And so, oh, well, if you're not Jewish, then you're going to kind of hang out over here, and the Jews aren't really going to have anything to do with you. And the circumcised and uncircumcised isn't really Gentile Jews. It's the fact that there were Jews that were called Hellenized. They were Greek Jews who weren't circumcised. They didn't go through circumcision. And so the Jews didn't want to hang out with them either. But when Paul addresses the church at Colossae with all these ways to divide, some of them very surface level ways to divide, maybe wealth, versus poverty, but some things that are very deep, in heritage and belief and practice and all kinds of stuff. They had all these ways to divide, but Paul says, listen, there are none of those. It's Christ is all and in all. In other words, if the very Son of God, if deity is going to dwell within your heart and within their heart, then he encompasses all of us and he is in all of us. And if God can be in me and in her and in him and over here, then I have to think that if the Almighty God can do that, then that's what I'm called to do. And so there's this idea of unity, and how relevant is that to today? How many wars do we have to go through? How many disagreements do we have to go through? How many people of wealth and people of poverty and having disagreements there and being jaded against one another? How many racists do we have to experience? How many misogynists do we have to experience? How many discriminators do we have to experience in our day and age? And yet then we turn and say the scriptures are irrelevant? Baloney. Bullcrap. Paul is telling us, he says, he tells us something so relevant. So he doesn't, he's not, Pollyannish in his ideas, right? He understands that there's a challenge to unity. So he says this, he says, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That's verse 12, Colossians 3. And over all these virtues, he told them to put on love, which binds us all together in perfect unity. And so this is a document, this is a letter, this is an inspired word from God, and it applies so richly today. Think about all the groups that I've mentioned. If they would just put on and clothe themselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, and then lastly, put on love and bind them all, which binds them all together in perfect unity. What problems could we solve? What impact could we have on our community? What impact could you have in your family, your workplace, the people who mean the most to you, the people that you feel the most commonest with? What things could be accomplished if you're just willing to follow what Paul's asking for in Colossians 3? So to all the people who say this document doesn't relate and isn't relevant and we should just push it away and ignore it because it doesn't apply to us, I just say bullcrap. So hopefully today you agree with me and you're saying bullcrap too, because Christ's love creates unity in the midst of diversity. And that's what we need to have. Unity in the midst of great diversity. Let's be diverse. Let's celebrate diversity, but let's have unity in love. Okay? Have a good day.